It's really cool to hear from the people that, I love my consultant brethren. Don't get me wrong if you were a speaker and you're a consultant. But I love to hear from the people that are doing the work and frankly, getting the battle wounds. So please welcome to the stage Jane Miceli.
Well, thank you, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So this cloud thing, I always say that DevOps is the gateway drug to the cloud, because once you figure it out on premise, then you've really got a good base for moving to the cloud, especially when you can point your pipelines directly to AWS and Azure. Here's the agenda about SREs. Hopefully you guys know what SREs are. If not, we'll go over that. A few of the stories and what you can do to win the battles, or win the war with the battles. The founder of Google SRE team said SREs are what happens when you task software engineers with operations work. And what is that purpose? It's not only optimizing the cloud spend and security and deployment and troubleshooting applications. There's a whole lot to it, and it's a lot of fun work. And you get visibility all the way up to the COO, CTO, VP, and it's really satisfying. It's also really difficult when things go wrong and you have visibility and they know your name all the way that high in the chain. Some of the technologies that we've used, and it runs across the board. Yes, I have both Perl and Python in there. So when you're in an SRE team and you're supporting many developers, just like on-prem, when they hit one of those soft limits in Azure and AWS, and they're not there just to have you spend a bunch of money, they're partners with you. And so there's some soft limits that you'll reach that your pipelines won't be able to deploy any further. And then you get a lot of developers, maybe hundreds, yelling at you that you're blocking their work. So, just like any good SRE would do, you submit a ticket and raise those limits. And if you say, hey, you should probably think about cleaning something up there, they're like, yeah, you don't understand. We've got deliverables. So this happens over a period of, say, 2 years, and you get to an unacceptable spend because we've automated the creation of all of these resources, but we haven't automated the destruction or put some governance around that. And so one of those very visible VPs and directors say, hey, Jane, you should probably try and cut spending by like 20%. Okay, can figure that out. And you look for resources that maybe aren't being used and turn off networking and see if there's a scream, if that's something that can be deleted at some point in time. And put up some backups. It turns out in AWS, there's a limit on having 10,000 backups for one particular region. And they don't warn you once you get there. So it's a good thing to know. So the lesson here is if you automate its creation, you should automate its destruction. And if you want to look really good and they say, hey, cut 20% of the cloud spend, I got like 91% cuts, which made me look really awesome in the report, except for the added piece where we're part of the problem that created that over a couple of year period. And so felt the need to mention that, and also please don't fire me. And the director said, well, we just spent millions of dollars to educate you and the rest of us. And now that we've invested all of that money in you, we're definitely not going to fire you. In a very, very rare instance, it's Saturday morning, around 9 a.m. There's no deployments the day before. And you start seeing on your monitoring dashboard a lot of red. You're like, oh, the monitoring team probably did some upgrade and didn't tell us that that was happening, or there's a network connection loss at work, or something wrong with the VPN, because there is no way all of the instances in one of our prod accounts got deleted. And so you're tempted just to ignore the alarm and go back to bed, maybe check on it in an hour and see if it resolves itself. But something nags at you because you didn't really see an email, and they're usually pretty good about emailing you when we're going to have these incidents. So let's just log into a load balancer or something, make sure everything's okay, or do a DNS lookup, and no, it's really down. Like, oh, that's weird. It turns out AWS had released a off-by-one bug that only hit a few accounts, and it happened to be our production account where all of our instances were deleted. Also, to rebuild that, it took the team and that department that we were supporting a good 10 or 12 hours to do that on a Saturday night. And of course, because having no idea that something like that could happen, they didn't sleep that night. And they certainly didn't get any rest the next day, because you're waking up from nightmares that all of your instances have gotten deleted. Well, that's an extremely rare thing. I would highly recommend a very robust DR plan for what happens in the very worst case scenario. Because if you think about it, this is the production account. This is your pipelines and your Bitrepo, Artifactory, and Nexus, and all the supporting infrastructure, like your databases. This is everything. And we also had learned that having enterprise support is a good thing, because when you have just developer type support on one of those production level accounts and you don't get the turnaround and you don't get any answers and you don't know what's going on and you start hitting deploy and those instances are being deleted again, like you have no ability to figure out when you're actually going to be able to solve this. So I do recommend getting enterprise support. In this particular scenario, we have 2 load balancers and a clustered database. And this is in production. And on a Sunday morning at about 6 a.m., there was something that happened that took the entire cluster down, 1 node at a time. And it took a few hours, so our service level monitors didn't go off. Some other contributing factors is we were doing a lot of updates to our test databases and integrations, and so we sent an email to the NOC, hey, don't escalate if you see anything related to this particular stack, because we're doing a lot of maintenance. So we wake up and look at our monitoring dashboards, because you get paranoid enough to do that, just to make sure that everything's okay. And that person who was on call wasn't really good about a complete failure for databases, being relatively new to supporting that service. Also, that person happened to be me. And so I logged in. And I'm like, oh man, I at least got to restart one of these database nodes, and we can get some traffic flowing and communicate and escalate, what's happening here, and then we can solve it once we've got the service back up. I didn't choose the node that had gone down last. I chose the one that went down first. So not only did the service have an outage for a couple of hours that was unreported, it was also where I had effectively deleted the data from that first time to the last node that went down, because all of the other nodes, when you start them up, use the first one that was restarted as the basis for the data. So having the least amount of data did not go well. From there, we learned a few things, that when we put people on call to a new service, that maybe there's the playbook that everybody should do, say 1 node or 2 node goes down, but maybe we escalate that and have an advanced playbook, call the DBA and get cleared for doing some of the more advanced recovery type of work. And so that was a difficult lesson to learn. And automated alerts are a good thing, because then you remove that human element of the not realizing or mixing up what the stacks are, because the production ones are a little important and they shouldn't be out for hours on end. This one is really, it's difficult because it's really self-imposed. Typically, we have certificates that we need to renew every year on our production stack, including wildcard certificates. And the work to do this once a year is very minimal. It's like 5 minutes worth of work. You talk to cybersecurity, get the new certificate, you put it into place, it's deployed everywhere, all is well. And you put it on your calendar to do the next year, except for you might be out on vacation, and there's only a few amount of people on the team that know how to do this or have access to do it, because you don't want to have everybody have the ability to create wildcards. It's a security risk. Except for you're on vacation, and then you start getting failures, connection failures to your APIs and your websites, because you can't connect to it. Your certificate has expired. We also did this another year in a row because we didn't learn the first time. Because it seemed like it would be so much more work to automate, like, a day or a half a day to go through all this work, and the security team didn't necessarily have an API to make that automatic. The very minimum should put some monitoring in place to monitor when your certificates are going to expire, or put together a Lambda of some sort that can go through and hit all of your endpoints and let you know when that 30, 60-day notice ahead of time, so that you can put it in your backlog and do that work. Or for extra credit, just automate the entire thing all the way through so that you don't get to be in that situation again. Yes, so monitoring for those tasks, and you justify it at the time because, well, it's only 5 minutes worth of work. Like, I will spend more time automating that bit of work than it would take to do it for 5 or 6 years in a row. So yeah, there's that way off, but it's a really, really important one to do. So automate your certificate renewals. Being on call sucks. However, no particular incident happens in a vacuum. There are always multiple contributing factors for the decisions you make about how well prepared you are, what automation that you have in place. And there's no particular one root cause, although a lot of companies will put together their knowledge base of incidents. And when you look through it, and there's specific teams identified rather than an incident or a particular person that's named, I call those the blame base versus the knowledge base. It's good to keep track of those things, but I highly recommend not necessarily calling out particular people, because when you're on call and you're going through a retrospective, it seems to be a game of not it. It's not me, it's over there. So how do you win that war? Put your people first. Code will always get better. Your infrastructure will always get better. And have empathy for your teammates and that poor gal that chose the wrong database node to restart that made an already difficult situation worse. Although it did come with some newfound respect from the DBA that I didn't quite have before that incident. So he's like, oh, you lost production data. Yeah, you're one of us now. And And just to make the point, he would send every once in a while database openings to me. He's like, you would qualify for one of these positions now. Retrospectives are always difficult, or postmortem, depending on what company that you're at. At that particular time, we had called them retrospectives, which is a lot of paperwork and in-depth analysis, often second by second, about what happened, how you communicated, who was doing what at what particular time, chat logs. And it's a lot of work to go through, but good stuff can come out of that, such as maybe you check to see if anybody else is logged in trying to restart the node while you're doing it too. Because when you've got multiple people doing the same things and attempting the same triage work, but not necessarily posting or getting online and saying, hey, I'm working on this, it can make for a really difficult situation. And so there's not only tools and processes, but there's people involved as well. So and post them. I think that's my next slide. Winning the war about transparency. One of my favorite retrospectives that's public is on GitLab. And I didn't realize that they were going to be a vendor here, so you should go check them out. But it talks very much about the details about what happened. It doesn't name a particular person. It says the engineer. And a rough timeline about what happened. And towards the bottom, there's a good 15 things that they decided to implement or do differently. And so it's not just one thing or the one engineer that deleted data for this particular outage. So do publish those, because it also promotes trust between groups, in that you don't want to keep hearing, yeah, sorry, that was our fault, but don't worry about it, we'll fix it for the next time. Like, you want to know what happened and what they're doing to make a difference so that it doesn't happen again. So I'm very much promote transparency. And going to a company that hasn't had a lot of cloud adoption, especially in infrastructure, data center type groups, it's not information that they generally make public, because they're afraid that it makes them look bad somehow. And the truth of the matter is, we're all human, so we're all going to make these mistakes. And it's a really complex system, so I would challenge everybody to start viewing those retrospectives as a good thing and learning from both each other. But then that builds trust. So it can be difficult to be vulnerable. So those are my big stories. What questions do you have for me?
Any questions? Right here on this side, real quick. Oh. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. You mentioned that the retrospective is very important. I wonder, how can we make it emotionally positive instead of negative? Because usually this, although the blameless is a culture, but it's very hard to make it not negative. Thank you.
It is a really good question. One of my favorite books, just for that reason alone, is Crucial Conversations, and there's another one, Fierce Conversations, about removing the accusation and emotion from a retrospective. So we're not focusing on the would've, could've, should've's, and all of the shame-producing language that's usually involved, and instead trying to make it as neutral as possible. The engineer wrote a script and deployed it without adding in because they thought this, because, or whatever attribution of intent or emotion on top of that. You just keep it to the facts. And that usually helps quite a bit.
Did you automate the cert?
Yes. Good question. Yes. All the way through. And a notification that it was done, too, just to make sure.
Right here in the middle.
So people, as you said, are going to make mistakes. And what tips do you have to help support that newer on-call person when they are inevitably going to make a mistake, so that they understand and don't feel like they're going to get fired because of what they did?
Well, having been that person who thought that I was going to get fired, I actually pulled some money out of my retirement account to make sure that I could take the blow that was going to happen in the next few months. I don't know that there's a lot of good ways to prevent that fear, but being supportive of the team, like that new person, hey, I've been there before. Now you're really one of us. Now you understand the guilt and what keeps you up at night over something that's really even not your fault, because, and remind them that it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It takes an entire team to fail, to make the decision to put that particular person on call in a service that they're not really familiar with. I was never really familiar with databases before that particular incident, but I could follow a playbook, and I thought that was enough. And practicing outages, I think, would help quite a bit. Usually SR teams are so extremely busy that there's not a lot of time to practice an outage or simulate one, and that usually helps, as well as putting that new person on call for like test and integration stacks. So during office hours, invariably something's going to end up happening, and it will probably look like what it does during production. So have them sit there side by side and fix it with them. Have them type on the keyboard and go through it all. I think all of that type of stuff helps. But it's painful. Also, I wasn't fired.
Kudos to our company for not doing that, by the way. Any other questions? One more hand for Jane, please. Thank you very much.